This episode of The Biggest Table is brought to you in part by Wild Goose Coffee. Since 2008, Wild Goose has sought to build better communities through coffee. And for our listeners, Wild Goose is offering a special promotion of 20% off a one-time order using the code TABLE at checkout. To learn more and to order coffee, please visit wildgoosecoffee.com. Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Biggest Table. I am your host, Andrew Camp, and in this podcast, we explore the table, food, eating, and hospitality as an arena for experiencing God's love and our love for one another. And today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Ethan Amos. Ethan is a local to Flagstaff, but is always happy to share that he is originally from the White Mountain Apache Reservation in White River, Arizona. He has over 18 years of experience working in the nonprofit, government, and corporate sectors as a subject matter expert on health-related social needs and health equity issues impacting individuals and families of lower income brackets. Now, as the president and CEO of the Flagstaff Family Food Center, Ethan is the lead strategist and ambassador advancing the organization's mission to serve those experiencing hunger. Though hunger relief has been the organization's primary focus, Ethan has introduced several anti-hunger initiatives to address food access issues in northern Arizona. Ethan has a bachelor's degree from Northern Arizona University, where he studied applied indigenous studies and sociology. He lives in Flagstaff with his wife Lucy and their 4 boys, 3 sons and 1 nephew. So thanks for joining me today, Ethan. It's great connecting with you again and always enjoy our conversations.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andrew. I appreciate it. Excited to have my first podcast experience with you. I'm not much of a podcast listener, but I think this will inspire me.
This has been a 3-part series on hunger, and really, as I thought about it, wanted to talk to somebody with boots on the ground. Like, we've talked with people from Jeremy from Baylor, Nancy from Bread for the World, who are doing big nationwide efforts, but, to really understand the community aspect and what food banks can and do to address food equity issues in our communities. I think it's super important.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. And maybe I'll take this time just to say I'm in my office and I have a team of a ton of people who apparently just have a hard time understanding that I cannot be, I'm not available at this moment, is what it says outside my door. I just had someone trying to come in. So if there's any interruptions, I apologize, but I think they'll get it from here.
No, they'll be great. So I just want to start here. I'm just curious, like as you think back to your childhood and growing up, like what was your relationship to food and the table and hospitality growing up?
Yeah, that's a great question. I appreciate that. Andrew, can you ask that again just so I can absorb that question entirely? I feel like I missed a piece of it.
So as you think back to your childhood and growing up, what was your relationship to food and the table for good and for bad?
Yeah, you know what? I'll say that I had a great experience with food growing up, but not in the cookie cutter sense. I think that when we think about a great relationship with food now and a great experience with food, we'll, obviously consider diet and access, and we'll consider, flavor and whether or not it was good and all those different things. But, growing up, I grew up in a town where there was one restaurant and it was called The Restaurant. It was, we had a town of 15,000 people. I don't know how big it is, but it's, I think poverty was a huge challenge in our community. It was on American Indian Reservation, and so there was some of those factors. And then additionally, when Apache people, historically, they've always been nomadic. And so when you think about trying to have a relationship with food, and you think about how being a nomadic culture impacts that, it gets really interesting because there's not a whole lot of farming, not in a sense that where it's a huge part of the culture. So there's a lot of foraging and a lot of hunting. And so growing up, I think you could really see that. So for me, hunting was a huge part of my life, and we had game meat. I mean, almost every for every night for dinner, which, now when I think about it, in a lot of ways we were living like kings, I mean, that's
Right.
just some top tier protein. And then obviously there was some major issues around access that, I dealt with being a part of um, a family that, didn't have a ton of resources. So
Mm.
sometimes there was, you know, trying to figure out how to get food was challenging at times. A lot of times we leaned on our grandmother's pantry, and what was in there, was what was for lunch. And oftentimes we got crafty and creative. A lot of it was high sugar, high processed, high salt foods, and so diet wasn't fantastic. But yeah, those are all some things that are part of my childhood that at least come to mind.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you sharing that. You talked about access and, high processed, high sodium, high sugar content foods. And so like how, as you think about health then and for you and you're raising kids, like how has that impacted what you want to pass on to the next generation?
You know what? That question is actually really political now, right? Because of
Right.
Maha and
Yeah.
all the different things there. And as a food bank, I'm actually conflicted on where I stand, just because in my home and in my house, specific to the question you're asking, we're very intentional about trying to get rid of ingredients that we know are bad for us.
Right.
And there's new information is coming out all the time. So anything I say in this moment will be outdated as soon as next week, because the sweetness in a Diet Coke, was bad for you and it causes cancer. But now all this research is coming out. Well, you have to drink quite a lot
Right.
to be impacted by that, and you'll probably drown from water internally before you get impacted by that. So it's such an interesting dynamic. But I'm trying to share that challenge with my kids. I got 4 boys. I got 3 sons and 1 nephew who live with us long term, and we really try to share the information with them. So, for instance, a hot topic is Red 40, and 2 years ago, we were just learning about how it impacted behavior and attention. So our boys were reckless and wild, and maybe out of a Hail Mary desperation, we were like, let's get rid of this.
Mm.
Let's get rid of this Red 40 out of our diet. And so we did. And I remember my son, Xavier, he was on board, and we were talking through what that meant for us. And that very night, I guess we had a giant cheesecake in the fridge, and it had the red drizzle, whatever it was, all over it.
Right.
And so we had finished dinner, and my son was like, he had kind of he remembered, like, oh, wait, the cheesecake. So he ran to the fridge, got it for us, and he was like, wait, it's red. And I said, oh, it's all right, let's just check. And I was sure it didn't, but it did. It had, red 40 and probably a ton of it.
Yeah.
And so we had just made the commitment as a family to get rid of it. And we were faced with this like challenge. I was like, you know what? I'm going to let these boys decide. I'm like, hey, it has red 40. What are you going to do? And so Xavier was looking at his mom, and he was, I think, 5 years old, maybe 4.5 at this time. He just started to cry. He was like, we've got to throw this away.
Mm.
The whole family was sad. I mean, it's all, 5-year-old boys. So they're all, crying, and we throw it in the trash. And so we were talking like, oh, that's wasteful. And maybe getting rid of this red 40 is not going to solve the attention. Maybe it's not. Throwing this cake away, maybe it's contributing to a mass waste problem. And both of those things are important to us. But we made a decision and a commitment. We're not going to waste moving forward. We're just not going to buy it. And that was 2 years ago. And so that was, a journey that we've been successful in. And I have seen behavioral changes in my boys, and we've gotten rid of different things like, sodium benzoate, and we try not to combine that with vitamin C. So we're just learning about what we can control and I'm talking through these things with my wife and my kids, and we're making decisions as a family. Um, there have been our agreement is kind of, on birthdays or parties or whatever, like, have at it, whatever. But overall, we want to focus on our health, and that means reducing or controlling what we put in our bodies. So that's kind of an elaborate walkthrough of our decision-making process, but it's been a really cool experience. It's really brought us together when it comes to food.
No, I appreciate and just bringing your kids into the matter, and helping them have the choice and the dignity, and it's not just parental authority dictating, which it is, like obviously you and your wife guide the discussion, but I love it that, with that cheesecake, giving them the choice,
Yeah.
after that commitment, I feel just honors the dignity of the kids.
Yeah, no, it was something that we talk about frequently. Actually, it's just the cheesecake experience.
For sure.
And I always feel weird. I'm like, man, people are judging us for throwing, wasting. And I was like, we're not going to solve the world by saving that cheesecake. So
No.
I'll share it. But, as I've been in my role, if I switch gears now, because I talked about in my house, this is how we operate as a food bank. Sometimes I'm conflicted because, there's food that goes in and out. And sometimes that food is probably not very healthy. And oftentimes people who get in line for food are folks who are already predisposed to certain health disparities. And, but who am I to rob them of choice?
Right.
And if someone told me, said, hey, you're not going to have Red 40 anymore, I probably would have reacted differently than me getting information and making a decision with my family and choosing to, right? And so instead of robbing our clients of choice, we've really tried to increase education in our community around health and access. And, once you start talking about health, it's like, who's right? Because you have your camp or Andrew camp, sorry, you have your camp that are saying that, you know, I like vegans and carnivores. I mean, the two contrasting differences, yet people have been successful on both sides and are heavily opinionated on both sides and will tell you what's right or wrong from their lens, And so with food, it just gets really emotional and weird and political. And one way we've really seen that come out is with, a recent House bill. There was a bill that has passed, I think, in Oklahoma and a couple other states. And that bill was to remove junk food from SNAP eligible purchases.
Hmm.
Now, in theory, excuse me, in theory, I love that, right? Absolutely. Let's do this. Let's make the big food companies who are putting all these toxins into our foods and feeding us all this junk, let's punish them by not buying their food. I get it. But when you think about what that looks like in practice, you have to consider the grandmother in Loop, Arizona, who is watching her kids on no income, her grandkids on no income, and she walks them to school and she buys them a granola bar or a blueberry muffin for breakfast because that's all they can afford, and SNAP pays for it. And she buys a coffee and they walk to school. She drops them off and she walks back. They do that every morning. Well, if this bill had passed where junk food is removed from eligible purchases, the way they describe candy in those House bills is almost exactly how you would describe a oatmeal bar,
Right.
a protein bar, even in some cases. And so it's like, well, now we're going to punish the people who have the least amount of resources to push forward our health agenda that is rooted in something else. And so I don't get it, so I'm all over the place when it comes to these things.
No, and I really appreciate you raising this tension that, I'm sure Flagstaff Family Food Center is not the only food bank that wrestles with these decisions. And, as we look at, SNAP, and WIC, and benefits that help low income and food insecure populations, like it's not an easy one cut answer, and so
Right.
just bringing up this tension, like, because then you have, you have the food available and you want to help people have dignity too, and so like you're not only dealing with the political issues, you're dealing with cultural issues and, the worth and dignity of people. And so like, I really appreciate you bringing up this tension. And so like, as you guys wrestle through this tension, like how have you sought to, just bring the dignity of people into this and not just give them a box, but maybe help them be able to choose? Because I know sometimes that's a huge wrestling point, I think, for food banks.
Yeah. First off, I really appreciate the way you worded that. I think for me, it is a bigger picture and it is a bigger issue. And lots of food banks are wrestling with this, but I would say also food banks are at an interesting time where I don't know if we can do things the way we used to anymore. We used to be able to just open up the warehouse. You open up the warehouse and you come get your food and we'll see you next week. And that's it. Don't give me any feedback. Don't tell me what your experience was like. I don't want to know why you're coming here. Just get your food and go. It doesn't cut it.
No.
And for us here at the Flagstaff Family Food Center, we highly value the customer service piece. We have a congregate meals program, and that's a place where we serve hot food and lunches, and folks can get in line. I mean, I tell my team, I'm like, we want to run like a restaurant. Don't give me the warehouse health codes. Give me the restaurant codes. What is the restaurant downtown that's super successful? What are their standards? Let's apply that here, And my team is on board, and with that kind of energy, we've just attracted people who want to be a part of that kind of creating that kind of experience for our clients, because it's not about whether they deserve it or not, but it's about us having an opportunity to serve people. And when we have that opportunity, it doesn't make sense to do it halfway. We go 100% and an extra mile to make sure they have a great experience. And I think it just comes with, desire to be hospitable. And that's been a part of my life because my grandmother, she was extremely hospitable. My grandfather was extremely hospitable. There were folks who would walk to my grandfather's house, and I spent a lot of time with my grandparents on my mom's side and my dad's side, but in this case, I'm referring to my mom's side. My grandfather, when he was alive, folks would come and knock on the door, and they would be inebriated and leaning and a little bit of stench, and but he welcomed them. He said, "Come on in, sit down."
Yeah.
And they would sit down, and me and my cousins would witness this. And the person would sit down. He'd go pour a pot of coffee, almost as if he was expecting them. He'd make a sandwich, ask them if they wanted mayo or not, asking them, if they wanted cheddar cheese or Swiss cheese. Just taking his time, and then making it, serving them with a plate, and not throwing it in a plastic bag and sending them off. So I saw this over and over and over again. So it's ingrained in me to where, you know what, when it comes to hospitality, and especially when it comes to food, like, we're going to do our best. And my team has been fantastic at that. I've really enjoyed seeing them. For instance, we've got Slack messages on our phone, and we're in this warehouse on this industrial road, and there's businesses all around us, and they started doing construction over here on Steve's Boulevard and over here on the other entrance. And so we were on Slack this morning, and my team said, "Hey, just FYI, the only way to get in is through that far entrance over on 4th Street, or whatever it was, way down there." And my team immediately responded saying, "Okay, let me update our clients." We refer to them as our clients, our neighbors, and we're posting on social media. "Hey, FYI, if you're headed here this week, just know you got to go through that entrance." Businesses aren't doing that, and for us, we have that kind of a standard here. And I think that the old way of doing food banking it's not acceptable. And sometimes it's a resource issue, but for us, we can do more, so we'll do more.
Right. And as you've done more, it's not, you're seeing an increase in the people you're serving. So it's not, I was looking over, you guys, Flagstaff Family Food Center released a 2024 food equity report, that we'll include in the show notes because it has some great valuable information. But, in it, the report mentions you guys from 2019 to 2023, you've seen a 200% increase, in the amount of families served through the food bank, and I think it was 79% increase, at your kitchen. So you're seeing more need while also rethinking what it means to serve your clients and be hospitable. And so how are you holding these in tension? Because, it would be easy to skirt the hospitality issue just because, okay, we have more people, we just got to move stuff. And so again, you're faced with this tension of we're serving more. And so how do we actually be hospitable in the midst of serving more?
Oh man, that's a good question that I don't know if it's easy to answer, but that's because I don't know if we've met my standard for hospitality while trying to
Right.
keep up with the need, right?
Yeah.
So it's like the desire to be hospitable is there. The desire to have that top tier customer service is there, and we're getting better at it. So I'm pleased with the pursuit of excellence, and we've still got a long way to go, and I think we do feedback, we collect feedback from our clients frequently, and thankfully many of them are having a great experience. There are a few, folks out there who want to share their individual experience, and sometimes it's negative, and sometimes it's just a Murphy's Law collision of things that happens for them, and we've got to take ownership of that. And at the same time, I try to tell my team, hey, do the best you can with what you have. Make the best decision you can. If you make a mistake, we'll deal with it whenever we need to, and we'll move forward. And so with that kind of logic and approach to this pursuit of excellence, we've given ourselves a lot of grace. And so now exploring the capacity side. The capacity side has been most challenging because we have not had a facility that has allowed us to meet the need. And so we've had to undergo some major construction projects, but that's significant fundraising. And I feel like I'm really good at, team culture and values and standards when it comes to pursuing the excellence we're talking about. And then the construction, I feel like I understand the order of operations there, and let's get going. But when you need to fundraise, that's where the X factor is. Like, dang it.
Yeah.
Yep. So we've had a couple capital campaigns that weren't necessarily successful, but it gave us what we need to get the job done, to redo our parking lot, to add a loading dock, to redo the pavement and stripe lines, increase our capacity at our kitchen as well, which is a different location, and do some major renovations there to allow us to feed more people. And most recently, we're successful in fundraising to start our next project, which is an agency shopping center. And so when it comes to food, we don't like when people are just dependent on the food center, because what if something happens, right? We want that dependence scattered out, and that scattering out will create additional resources, and the resources will empower people as opposed to have them be dependent on us. Our agency shopping center should really focus on spreading out that impact, allowing agencies to come shop with us and get food for their pantries, and allowing folks to get services through them. So we're really excited about that, and we're continuing to meet the need. But as we've met the need, we're learning. We haven't met the need, but as we're getting closer to meeting the need, we're realizing again how much more there is to do. So I think now the challenge is just understanding where our capacity is, like, because you can only work effectively within your capacity, and we may be nearing that here pretty soon.
No, and the need in Coconino County is large. Coconino County is the second largest land mass county in the U.S., if I'm not mistaken, only behind San Bernardino. So we're dealing with a vast population. You have indigenous populations scattered throughout that are more at risk as well. And so, if you just think of Flagstaff, it's one thing, but when you think of the larger, broader Coconino County, the need is vast and probably overwhelming at times.
Right, absolutely. I appreciate you laying the context for the work that we do, because when we're so close to tribal nations, a couple of very large tribal nations, and when our neighbors who come to get food from us, 54% in our recent survey identified as American Indian. And so it's like, you know, how do we factor that in? I'm from White River. I'm light skinned, but I'm from the res. I've been there my whole life up until my in my youth, and then in my adulthood, I came up here to Flagstaff, and have even still just found myself around natives more often than not. And it's just my community that I feel comfortable with, and so I feel like I have a pretty good head on my shoulders when it comes to decision making and inclusion of relatives out there who are coming to get food from us from the reservation, or folks who live here. But at the same time, the needs change over time. And my personal lived experience from 2002 is probably quite different from 2025. And so the question is, how do I challenge myself to grow and learn, but also empower my team to get knowledge and skills so that they can be effective when serving folks out there? So, I feel like we're doing pretty good with that. We had a consultation on a number of occasions with Jonathan Nez, who is the past Navajo Nation president, and he has been extremely helpful for us. It's been an honor to get to know him, and he's someone who really values the human relationship with food as well, and so he gives us a very empowering and unique perspective. And I've shared that experience and insights with my team. And his wife, Ophelia, is continue to support us. They're both in Flagstaff and want to give back and are helping in this way. So, yeah, it's definitely different for sure.
Can you give us, like, for our listeners, many of us not familiar with, the reservation culture, indigenous populations, the struggles, we probably hear more negative than positive, but like at times, but can you give us all just a small glimpse of the struggle, especially when it relates to food insecurity? Like what are the struggles, the barriers that indigenous populations living on reservations face when it comes to food? Because I feel like that's a unique aspect for Flagstaff and Coconino County.
Yeah. So I think for those listening that do not know already, each reservation is different, right? And each tribe is different. And, relatives in Alaska, you call them Alaska Natives. And then down here, indigenous communities like to be referred to by their tribal name in many cases, or just their name. So like the Navajo Nation, they refer to themselves as Dene, and that is a name that comes from them, for them, and by them. So it's really cool. So I think what I'm trying to paint the picture for here is the individual nature of each of the communities that we serve. And even though poverty has some common denominators, and poverty kind of uses the same tools, it does look very different in terms of the tribe that you're nearest by. So for those of you listening, it's good to know that as you begin to serve your communities. Specifically to our region here, I would say one of the major issues revolves around access, specifically around proximity. Our Navajo Nation oftentimes has a very spread out community where it's just people live so far from each other. They live so far from gas stations and restaurants, especially grocery stores. Sometimes you know, when I run out of an ingredient when I'm cooking, I can just run 2 fries down the road and I'm right there, run right back. I don't even have to turn off the stove. I'm kidding. I turn off the stove. You or my wife takes over or whatever. But when you eliminate all those conveniences and you find yourself in a rural community, and obviously this is not specific to tribes, but there's those challenges around proximity. And then Oftentimes, when proximity is a major issue, jobs are difficult to come by. Where do you go for work? Where do you go for school? And so that creates a bit of a challenge where, now reduced income and reduced access create hunger. And, people are resilient. They come up with different solutions and systems. For instance, many of the folks who come and get food from us are coming from the res. And so they'll come, and it's not like they're driving 2 hours to the food bank and then turning around, but they're making their trip to town once or twice a month, and they're stopping at the food bank. And when they get here, on a few different occasions, I've seen people park out towards the front of the road, and they'll get out and they're looking through their groceries. And they're taking notes because they're going to go to the grocery store, create a menu for the week based off what they have, starting with the groceries from the food bank, right? So if we have a ton of lentils, if we have a ton of chicken, if we have a ton of something, they create their menus based off that to offset their costs. So traveling back and forth is quite a challenge, and that's assuming you have a vehicle. It's assuming you have gas to pay for the vehicle. It's just making all these different assumptions, and so that's what hunger looks like.
No, I appreciate that. And again, hunger is not just, access to food. It's the proximity, it's transportation, it's jobs, it's healthcare, and even for Flagstaff, I think it's housing. Housing plays a huge role. I think, you guys have mentioned in the role of food security for your clients.
Yeah, for our clients, basically the question is, would you rather pay rent, or you have to pay rent, you have to pay utilities, and you have to pay for medical bills, and you can only pay for two of them. Which one are you going to pay for? Well, you're not going to pay for food because that wasn't an option. People just sacrifice food all the time.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like they're trying to keep up with these other bills, and food is the first thing to go. And so it's like you can't negotiate with your landlord in most cases. You can't negotiate with utility companies. You can actually make sure you be resourceful, right? Make sure you call and see if they can give you a better deal or whatever. But most times they're not going to do it. Groceries, instead of buying something, that's high protein, lean, fresh, green, you can buy something that's 50 cents, and that's usually ramen or something unhealthy and highly processed. So people make those sacrifices.
No, and that's when I was talking with Jeremy Everett from Baylor, he talks about that, food security and is sort of the litmus test for the health of a community, that like you can judge the health of a community by their food security because, like you said, food is the first thing to go. So if they have good housing, if they're able to have access to affordable health care and have a well-paying job, like, they will then be able to hopefully get the food they need, so, what you're just saying is like, if without secure housing, without, affordable health care and, if you're not sitting on medical debt, like food disappears, and you have to make the sacrifices, and so as you think about Flagstaff Family Food Center and maybe food banks as a whole, but particularly in Flagstaff, like what role do you see the Family Food Center in addressing, the systemic issues of hunger?
So at the Flagstaff Family Food Center, I think we're a bigger food bank than most food banks, and we're not giant. There's a lot of giant food banks out there, and we're not. But on the grand scheme of all food banks in the country, we're probably larger than 75% of them. So we have a few more resources. We have a team of almost 40 people. We have volunteers, about 90 to 100 each day, to serve probably 2,000 plus people a day, depending on how you break down that food box. What I mean by that is, does the food box serve one person, a family of four, and how do you count that, right? So that's where I get that 2,000, 2,300 person per day number. all that to say, we have a bit more resources than I think a smaller food bank would. And I just want to say I recognize that challenge. Uh, and I have a board of directors who have been educated on the challenge and the need, and they have been so helpful. They've helped me dream bigger and think things through much more critically. They've allowed me to understand business concepts the way that I need to, and that empowers me to be able to empower my team. And so I've got a fantastic team, probably the best team I'll ever have. I mean, I'm so confident that they can't get much better than this. They're highly skilled, highly passionate, and obviously we could get better in other areas. And if you're listening to this, you know all that. And if you're on my team, you're listening. I didn't say that. I'm kidding. I tell them all the time. Okay, so now to answer the question, we're at a place right now at the Flagstaff Family Food Center where we can go upstream with half our team, and half our team can be upstream, and half our team can be downstream. So folks who are in the river who are drowning, we can figure out why they're drowning
Right.
up there. Because at the bottom of the river, there's people in the water who need to be saved, right? And so I think I got that analogy from Ross over at the shelter. And so I got half my team jumping in, trying to save people, and I got other half trying to figure out why. And I just wanted to explain that analogy in case there were listeners who were curious about the upstream approach, right? And so the upstream approach is to find the solution for hunger. It's a bit pretentious because if someone could have solved hunger, someone would have did it somewhere, right?
Yep.
The reason why that logic is doesn't make any sense is because it takes everyone to solve hunger, and we've never done that as an entire world. So as a community, how do we increase resilience? That's really what the question is. Because let's use Flagstaff as an example. In Flagstaff, we have major highways, the I-17 and the I-40. And those two roads provide almost all our food, probably 95% of it. We don't grow our own food here. We don't have the infrastructure, the water. We have a really high elevation with short growing seasons. I mean, what are we going to do? And flashback back to 2020, there was the pandemic. All our grocery stores were empty in 3 days of all the essentials. And it was just like, wow, we're so darn vulnerable. And I recognize that it was like that in a lot of places. But the interesting thing is that when push comes to shove, people who are at the bottom of the I-17 and the other major cities on the I-40, there's a lot of them. They're going to look out for themselves first. And then they're going to send food elsewhere. We're in a vulnerable spot, and we need to understand that. And so our upstream issue of trying to get ahead of the hunger is much more complex than finding enough food, because then how do we solve and increase our resilience for the future? And so we're still exploring what that looks like. I know that it's a community education piece. Everything I just shared, our decision makers should know that. Our mayor, our county supervisors should know that. And so we've been very active in creating educational platforms and opportunities for these decision makers to learn about the vulnerabilities of our food system in northern Arizona. And I have a team who talk about that much more articulate and academic than I do, but that's my version.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, because you don't just think of access to food, for individual families, but access to the community, and Flagstaff's a beautiful place. My wife and I feel privileged to live here, but we are an isolated, community where, like you said, elevation, short growing season, all play into what the community is able to do. And so, we're reliant on other communities to get the food here. So, and you guys are also doing, an End Hunger Summit, which, I appreciate and I'm looking forward to myself. But yeah, so like, how does because Flagstaff Family Food Center won't be able to solve hunger by themselves. And so, like, as you think about it, this is probably a silly question. Who needs to be involved as we think about ending hunger?
Yeah, I'll call it a silly question because I don't have the answer.
No, right.
That puts the pressure on you and not me. But you're right. It's like who should be involved, and when I think about it, it's I can't think of anyone who shouldn't be involved. I just to make this work, everyone from the mayor, which thankfully in Flagstaff right now we have a fantastic mayor who understands hunger and advocates for us, and a council, and a great support system around us. But everyone from, gosh, the business owner who sells cars, why should he or she be involved? It's got nothing to do with that person. Well, Babbitt Ford owner Alan Chan is on my board of directors. He's a past CPA. He's an excellent business person. He is such a great help to me. He gives me ideas. He helps me think things through. He helps me look at my financials, and I can ask him the silly questions, and he explains them to me so that way I can run the business properly. There's folks out there who can contribute to the cause or empower people who can be contributing to the cause in an effective way. And it's got to be that multi-layered system where maybe you don't have time to go to the food bank and volunteer. Maybe you can't work there. Maybe you can't go and donate, $1,000 every month. And that's what we've reduced it to. If you can't do that, then you're not helping. But no, there's so many deep layers of things that are happening. I mean, Andrew, I would probably not agree to do this, and I've declined a few of these kinds of opportunities just because I didn't buy into what the person was doing. But after knowing you for a couple of years and just seeing your passion for wanting to share the information and the narrative, and your experience with food in the past is very important to you, and you want other people to have a great experience with food. All those things made me say yes to this, and this shares information with people who are listening, and they're going to go back and want to make a difference. And so for me, at a minimum, the involvement could be the person saying, you know what, I'm going to learn more today about what I can do. Or, you know what, I have surplus on my garden this year. I'm going to donate that. And it's not just a gesture. It means so much to people. So, and maybe the last piece I'll say about that is, last weekend I was working, I had worked 16 or 17 days in a row. I mean, just nonstop. And I did it to myself, and I do it it happens frequently, but I'm trying to figure out how to manage all that. Also, I enjoy it, so no pity party for me. I was at the kitchen because our chef needed a day off, and there was no coverage, so I was in there, helping cook and chop veggies or whatever. And there was this guy who I recognized. He was chopping veggies next to me, and we were talking, and I was like, I know this guy from, where do I know him from? Where do I know him from? And it was just one of those conversations where I couldn't quite get an opportunity to politely ask because I feel like we knew each other. And once another person came in later, I asked, I said, hey, can you remind me who this person is? And she said, oh, that's blank blank. He's one of our clients. And I said, oh, wow. Yeah, of course, I know that. I couldn't recall because it was a different setting, right? And so I talked to my culinary manager when he showed up. And I said, oh, how'd that happen? And my senior culinary manager showed up. No one was in the building. He needed help. And there was 2 clients that were outside. And he said, hey, guys, I am not going to be able to make a dinner for anyone tonight. Unless I get help, would you be willing to help me? And they said, yeah. So he brought them in, showed them how, some washing hands and food care, food safety stuff, and then put them right to work. And they were there just working. And so I showed up. The culinary manager went to his doctor appointment, and I was working with everyone. A couple volunteers showed up. Manager came back, and that's how it all happened. So for me, I'm like, you know what? Not every client can help. Not every client needs to help. But if they can help, just about anyone.
No, for sure. And I appreciate that. It's, yeah, so cool that, just people willing to step up and fill a need.
Yeah.
And love what you shared about how people can be involved, whether it's just learning about what are the food insecurity needs in your community, to volunteering at a food bank, or, it looks different for each person, and but we can all take a small part, and that's what I've enjoyed sort of as I've done this sort of hunger series, and what it looks like to end hunger, like the different aspects we can all be involved in. And Bread for the World offers letter writing campaigns where you can write letters to your local politicians, or, being involved in a food bank. And so wherever, and it goes back to capacity, like what is your capacity, in this season of life for yourself? And that will change, and so hopefully just raising awareness can maybe push somebody to make a decision, to get involved.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's been a lot going on politically, and how has that impacted you guys? And what is the current political situation? How is that impacting food banks for you guys? But are there ways to help other people understand how political decisions are impacting food banks currently as well?
Yes, with SNAP being reduced, we are going to have a significant impact. I mean, SNAP was an anti-hunger strategy. SNAP helped people be stable and work and provide, and oftentimes sometimes SNAP offset the grocery bill so they could pay for childcare so they could go to work, And so now it's just going to turn into a major mess. Sometimes these work requirements are going to be disadvantageous to people who are just trying to stay alive. So who knows? I try not to get riled up because there's a whole lot of unknown at this point, and I hate to speculate because speculation will turn into fear mongering. But as a food bank, I'll tell you this: what we were doing before was not working. What we were doing before was not enough. So I'm all for change. I'm all for reset buttons. However, there is a right way to do things and a wrong way. And from my food bank perspective, removing SNAP in the way that they have agreed to do so is the wrong way. And there will be people who will be highly impacted from this. And food banks don't have capacity to meet the need. So for me, I can't help but think about, as a food bank, we're preparing for a famine type of rush toward food banks. Will that happen? I don't know, and I hope not. But when you have a business or a company, you prepare for the worst and the best, right? And so I'm preparing for the worst, and I do see droves of people coming to us because it's happened in certain times in the past when our economy was shaken up just a little bit. And so politically, I'm a bit worried. I'm confident that there's someone out there who will come up with a sharp idea. Someone came up with Snap. Someone will come up with something else. It's just that transition time. It's going to be challenging.
I appreciate that. And just the capacity of you guys to start planning and thinking through, okay, hopefully it doesn't come to this, but let's not be caught,
right, yeah,
unprepared. How can we begin to set, stuff in progress so that if the worst case situation does come, we're ready to serve the community, which really applaud you guys on taking that focus and initiative.
Yeah, thank you. We'll see what happens. We're trying to bring food banks together, stay unified, and work together.
Mm-hmm. And so as we begin to close, like, as you think, again, people listen to podcasts from all over, right? So like, some people are in Flagstaff, some people are in Brazil, or, all over the US. So like, what would you want to say to a global audience as a CEO of a food bank? What would you want to say to the listeners?
Yeah, maybe I'll, in this instance, one of my driving inspirations is Jesus. I mean, just the way he used food to interact with people. The food was a bridge for him to say what he needed to say and for him to do what he needed to do. And sometimes what he needed to do was just love people. And in many cases, he just did that through food and water. Food and water were a huge part of his ministry. So I don't think you can be effective at ministry without considering those who don't have food.
Hmm.
And I don't know what that looks like for the listener. And if your ministry is like my grandfather's, handing out sandwiches, to me, that's where the fulfillment comes from in ministry. And we can't lose sight of that. We can't
No.
forget that, and I think it's the heart behind the volunteer. It's the heart behind the donor. It's the heart behind a good community member. And to me, that's what Jesus, I would say, serving the poor, feeding his children is an absolutely high priority for him, and so, yeah, that's my encouragement, as a food bank CEO. There's a lot to do. I don't know how long I'll be a food bank CEO. Maybe I'll change careers. But for me, I don't think I'll ever stop doing what I've learned here at the food bank. It's going to be a huge part of my life, and I'm blessed for that.
No, I appreciate that word about Jesus using food, and he couldn't minister to people without feeding them. It's a great reminder.
Yeah.
You know, and some fun questions about food as we wrap up. Just to lighten, on a slightly lighter note, what's one food you refuse to eat?
Bananas.
Okay.
Yeah. People, we bring bananas in the warehouse sometimes, and there's all kinds of inside jokes. My team knows I hate bananas, and sometimes they'll
Okay.
leave one under a paper here because I can smell it.
Yeah.
I think if I can get past the smell and the way it looks and all that stuff, if I eat it, I don't know if the taste is really that bad. Nah, you don't know. I think it's pretty good. Banana.
Bananas. Fair enough. All right. What's one of the best things you've ever eaten?
Oh man, I had a roommate from Nepal once. His name was Navin. Super swell guy. He would make this kind of Nepalese curry almost, several times a week, and I just have, I he made it so frequent that I would just start to watch him. I'm like, hey, Navin, you need a hand? And I'll just try to learn. And so I feel like I got it close to me. People will come over and eat, and they always say like, "Oh, this is so different." I'm like, "Oh, well, it's not regular curry that you're used to. Probably it's kind of a Nepalese kick to it." And so, but that right there, that's just something I think about. Navin, if you're out there, I hope you're doing well, man.
That's cool. And finally, there's a conversation among chefs about last meals, as in if you knew you only had one more meal left to enjoy, what would it be? So if Ethan had one last meal to enjoy, what might be on your table?
I mean, if my last meal is soon, give me that, ham and cheese sandwich with some blueberries. That's it, because that's what my kids will put together.
Okay. I love it.
Yeah. So I think, that's what they can make their most proud of, and they try to do this Gordon Ramsay critique of it, and they ask me to critique it, and it's a fun time we have. So if I'm going out soon, give me that one. If I'm going out, later on, give me some kind of, elk chili or, some kind of game meat that I can, that's what I'm going out on.
For sure. No, I love it. Well, Ethan, really appreciated this conversation. I appreciate your heart, your wisdom, your tenderness with which you approach life. We'll obviously include Flagstaff Family Food Center, website in there. Anything else, where people, any last words for our listeners?
Yeah, you know what? I'm always available. I love to talk food, and I guess I'm quite busy. So my email is ethan@hotfood.org. If you want to reach out and chat, I'm always open to it. And I may have said some things that I would probably second guess here, and I don't know that I answered all your questions fully. When I was thinking about it, but I think for a first time podcast experience, I had a good time. So I'm thankful
Appreciate it.
for the
Yeah.
opportunity.
No, thank you for taking the time. And yeah, do reach out to Ethan or find your local food bank, and just get to know what the needs are. Whether you may not start volunteering, but, I think I found joy just in sitting with Ethan and learning, about what they're doing, but also the hunger, the issues we face in Coconino. So if you've enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, leaving a review, or sharing it with others. Thanks for joining us on this episode of The Biggest Table, where we explore what it means to be transformed by God's love around the table and through food. Until next time, bye.